The aid agency Red Crescent has said that 74 bodies of refugees were washed ashore in the western city of Zawiya on the Mediterranean Sea. Migrant deaths have risen to record levels along the Libya-Italy smuggling route across that sea. In February 2017, European Union leaders agreed on a controversial new plan to help stem the flow of refugees from that North African country.
However, the latest disaster pushes the number of refugees killed attempting boat crossings to Europe this year to around 330, although the number is believed to be an underestimate, as not all bodies washed up in Libya are recorded by the United Nations and victims are not always found. A spokesperson for the Red Crescent said the circumstances of the most recent disaster were unclear and the bodies would be buried at a cemetery allocated to unidentified people in Tripoli. Crossings have continued through the winter, despite treacherous conditions at sea, and the European Union has been partly blamed for spiralling death rates after smugglers switched from wooden fishing vessels to small and light dinghies, which are far harder for security agencies to detect. Yet there is relatively little news reporting in the West of these repeated deaths at sea, with only a small amount of time given to most of the reports.
Why are so many refugees risking their lives to come to Europe? And has the European Union done enough to address this refugee crisis? Simple questions with important answers. 74 dead refugees washed up on the shores of Libya. How does the public feel about this? We asked them.
Well, pretty angry. I mean, the government's made it clear that it's not going to send out search and rescue because it thinks it encourages smuggling or something, which is a ludicrous kind of position to take because it results in death both sides of the Mediterranean. So pretty angry because we're partly to blame for that kind of thing happening.
I feel sad because these people must have left their country for probably safer or better pastures and found any means possible to get there. So it's a sad thing, really.
It's just horrible. I can't imagine how it feels for just the people who have to experience that. And that's just horrible. I don't like it. No.
I think it's awful, to be honest with you. It shouldn't be happening because we should be helping people before they have to make those kinds of journeys.
I think they should have more control over the people that enter illegally. So they should have more patrols on the Libyan seas and the Mediterranean to make sure that people don't die. Innocent people like children, women.
The fact that 74 refugees were found dead, washed up on the shores of Libya, is of course outrageous, and it makes me very angry. What's worse is that this is not some kind of one-off incident. Thousands upon thousands of refugees are literally running for their lives, and in the process they are risking their lives to come to Europe. Over 350, nearly 400 refugees have been found dead in the Mediterranean already this year, and we're only in February. So what makes me even more angry is the fact that European leaders know about this high death toll, and they have undoubtedly seen the harrowing images that we have all seen of refugees trying to cross those dangerous waters, and yet there is still inaction. They are still engaging in military interventions, and refugees are still dying every single day trying to cross the Mediterranean.
Well, firstly, of course, I feel deeply saddened seeing such, large-scale tragedy. But I think there was also a sense of feeling slightly numb to it at this point because there's so many figures coming through almost on a weekly basis. It's almost like the terror attacks we see in Iraq and in Afghanistan now. We hear these large figures coming through, the whole time. And that, I guess, leads to a feeling of anger that European countries and the EU have had such a history of indecision and delay around this issue that it leads to suffering on such a large scale like this. And there's no excuse really at all. You know, this political hot potato has led to these delays, and it's meant that, you know, there's all these people who are suffering for it.
Why, in the public's opinion, do so many refugees from places like Syria, Eritrea and Libya risk their lives and the lives of their close ones to come to Europe?
Because there's nothing left for them. Just, yeah, the cities are destroyed. I've met women who just took their children and walked through countries, and yeah, it's just they're desperate for help, and nobody's helping them over there. Instead, Europe is sending weapons to countries so that Syria is bombarded again.
Well, you said it, you don't get into a boat unless it's safer than the land, right? So things must be pretty awful over there.
Probably feels there's a better way of life, or they're trying to escape something out in their countries that they're going through.
It's a better life. Europe's got its own conflicts and that, but it's not a war zone. People are just trying to find a better life. No one wants to die. No one wants to leave home, but no one wants to die. It's just that simple.
Honestly, I've no idea, because Europe's a mess. But it's for a better life, I suppose, and I'd probably do the same. It's got to be bad if you're willing to risk yourself to travel to another land, so I'm sure they've got their reasons, and I can only applaud them for trying, I suppose. It's a shame that people have to suffer for it.
I think it's because of the wars that are taking place, the political wars. I think the politicians should sit down and try and sort out things around the table instead of fighting each other.
Well, it's to get away from ISIS and the war, isn't it?
Because their countries are poor, in my opinion. Well, the countries are made poor for loads of different reasons. So they're coming to where they can see people are living relatively comfortably, to a degree, if you can call it that.
To have a better life, free of bad labour, the wars and stuff that's going on in the countries.
The refugee crisis has been entirely orchestrated and perpetuated by Western powers. So military interventions like the ones in Syria, Libya and Iraq have destabilised the region, and the destabilisation of Libya in particular has led to criminal activity being rife, and smugglers have been allowed to flourish, which means they can take migrants across the Mediterranean. Secondly, colonialism, of course, has led to a historic underdevelopment of the region, and climate change has only exacerbated things. So when we take all of these things into account, it's no wonder that refugees want to seek refuge in Europe.
I feel that there have been calculated decisions made, that the risk of the journey is less than the risk of staying put where they are. Speaking to refugees on the beaches of Greece whilst I was filming out there, a lot of these people were aware of these risks, but they'd made these conscious decisions to kind of put their families through these ordeals because they felt that the future was worth it, was brighter, and there was more chance of survival than staying put where they were.
Does the public feel Britain and the European Union have done enough to address the refugee crisis, and why?
I can't talk about Britain since I'm not from Great Britain, I'm from Germany. In Germany, it's pretty much every day in the news. I guess it's the same here. So I think it's addressed, but yeah, somehow we have to talk to the people in the way their empathy is woken up, yeah.
How do you think we could do that?
I think to bring them in contact with the refugees, to not call them refugees, but to call them Bahar or Ali or Mohammed.
Probably not. I feel like when Angela Merkel said that she was going to take in, as many as she did, that was really great. And then when the kind of the massacre. Well, it was an awful kind of thing in the Christmas market, and then everyone said that she shouldn't have taken in these refugees because possibly one of the perpetrators was from that background. It kind of really made me sad because our government's done so little and is already backsliding on pledges it did make in terms of the taking unaccompanied children. You know, it's already going back on that. It's doing a pitiful amount, frankly.
I think they do what they can, but at the same time I feel like they don't really want to get involved too much. But I think they do what they can. You can't take in millions of people all the time without having backlashes, but I think they're doing their best in their way.
I don't think the whole world has done enough to address the refugee, because it's a mass movement of people and it's our own world. It's, you know, it's one planet, and they should have the right to go somewhere safe if they want to.
I don't think it's done enough, no, but I think it's trying to do its best, trying to cope with the numbers that are coming in. But they should try and do more.
I think we've done a lot to help, but we can definitely do a lot more. Like taking in more refugees instead of just taking them from the camps, like taking them straight from Europe and stuff.
I couldn't say. They probably are doing what they can, but, you know, they probably, I don't know, it probably runs deeper than that.
Not a lot, not too much. Why? Just for security reasons. I don't think they've done enough that they could do.
So only a couple of months ago, the British government paid for a big wall to be put up in Calais in France to prevent refugees from coming to the UK. At the same time, Hungary has closed their borders, and the EU and Turkey made a deal to send refugees back to where they came from. So we cannot really say that the EU or Britain is adequately addressing the refugee crisis and looking at the root causes. If they were really concerned with ending this crisis, they would look at the political and economic factors that have led to it. So that would mean that they would stop engaging in military interventions and they would start engaging in some kind of equal, genuine, meaningful economic exchange. At the moment, neither of those things are happening, so we cannot say that these powers have adequately tried to address the crisis.
I don't think that Britain and the European Union have done nearly enough to address the refugee crisis. I think their delays and indecision have led to complete chaos on the ground. They've allowed traffickers to profiteer from some of the most needy people in the world, and they're putting people in these situations where they need to take incredible risks and risk their own lives and those of their families. I think that the meagre deals that have been struck with Turkey and Libya are kind of cash incentives to countries with worse human rights records and worse economies than our own to clear up a mess that Europe don't want to see on its own doorstep. I don't think they go nearly far enough to actually addressing the problem. And I think it's actually incredibly depressing that some of the most wealthy countries on earth can't deal with this, and I'm talking about the Middle Eastern countries as well. I think this has been a real time to show kind of humanitarian colours, and we've all failed it completely.
More than 5,000 refugees were drowned, suffocated or died of hypothermia at sea in 2016, mainly on the central Mediterranean route from Libya, now the deadliest crossing in the world. And it is estimated over 300 people have died since the start of 2017, according to the United Nations. Dinghies are routinely overloaded with around 150 people, causing great danger for those making the hazardous crossings.
Do the election of Donald Trump, Brexit, and the rise of extreme right-wing groupings in Europe mean the West has become a hostile place for refugees to seek safety, and why?
I don't know Donald Trump personally. I only know him from the westernized media. So, yeah, I don't know how the media portrays him and in which way this picture is right or wrong. But from what he says in public, I think right-wing people are encouraged to hate other people. And I think you can be against foreigners coming into your country. I think that's okay, but I don't think you can hate people for that. Yeah.
Yeah, almost certainly. I mean, it's hard to quantify these things, but it's definitely a global trend. You know, these things don't happen in a vacuum. They don't happen just within national borders. It's a tendency we're seeing around the world. As you say, Le Pen in France, here with UKIP and Brexit, the rise of Trump. It's worrying.
I think there's a change happening, so it's all up in the air. Maybe when it settles, then things might look better. But speaking from my point of view, living in the UK, probably they're not doing enough, or they could do better. I'm not too sure.
The way the world has gone now has put a persona of the West as becoming intolerant. We were the people that started globalisation, and now it seems we want to cut our ties when it suits us. So,
I think it has, because the politicians they try to kick out the people who actually need help instead of trying to help them. So trying to give them proper housing, trying to find them jobs which they can do. So instead of being hostile, yeah.
Oh, definitely. It's just a lot more hostile environment for any Muslims or anything like that that are coming over.
Possibly, yes. In my opinion, our countries need to get their houses in order. This is what needs to happen. Our countries, because I wasn't born in England. Our countries need to get their houses in order, and then obviously people won't feel the need to come over the border, risk their lives, not knowing if they're going to get there or not. So technically, I'm going to half put not the blame, but I'm going to half put the responsibility on the leaders of the countries that we are all leaving from to come here.
The election of Donald Trump, the rise of Le Pen, and the Brexit vote do unfortunately show us that the West is a hostile place for refugees seeking safety. However, I would say that this is of course not a shared vision of the entire population of the West. This is a particular narrative that has been pushed forward by the media and politicians who have a divide and rule objective at heart. Secondly, I don't think that this is something new. The French state has always been Islamophobic. The United States has historically had a problem with white supremacy. And thirdly, the UK was founded on colonialism, empire, and slavery. Of course, at the moment, things are particularly bad, with people in the UK being deported every day and thrown into immigration detention centres that are privately run, where women are at risk of sexual violence. And in the US, of course, there's been the Muslim ban. So, of course, things at the moment are particularly bleak.
I firmly believe since Brexit, since Trump, since the rise of Le Pen, that Europe and the West have become a much more hostile place for refugees. We saw Farage campaigning through his Brexit campaign, using images of Syrian refugees when the debate should have been about European migration. Donald Trump was talking about Islamic extremism in relation to the refugee crisis in order to appeal to kind of base fears of American people with complete disregard to kind of facts and statistics. These are the people that are now leading these conversations. There was a real moment where there was a collective will to want to help these people, and European citizens were forcing their government's hands into instilling quotas to take refugees. We had one ourselves in the UK. David Cameron agreed to take 10,000 Syrian refugees, and that has already been eroded with that collective will. We've even kind of given up our promise to take in child refugees. That's the level that it's got to. I think it's a more hostile place. It's more hostile than it's ever been.
Why, in the public's view, do the deaths of so many refugees not get more media attention?
Maybe because people get tired of it. Yeah, and they don't want to hear about it anymore. And yeah, they just got tired of it, so the media stopped reporting. Or, you know, with Haiti, it was the same. As soon as people got used to it, they stopped reporting, and it got old because the media always needs something new to report about. Yeah, maybe it's that, I don't know.
Sometimes I know medias play a bit of a mind game, or sort of streamline a lot of news, and then after a while they don't. Whatever reason it is, they should highlight all the problems. It shouldn't be for a certain period of time or for a certain reason. Sometimes I know they manipulate certain things, maybe just before an election is going on, they bring up certain news or whatnot. But it should be highlighted, because at the end of the day, this is people's lives. It concerns people, families, children and whatnot. So they shouldn't sort of limit the news. Everyone should be aware of it, and it brings accountability for everyone in government or their offices. It gives them accountability for the actions they take and decisions they make.
Probably because every time they report it, people complain that there's too much going on. Like, they're always so... I know, like, if I see it on the news, I know that comments on, like, online, everybody's just like, why are you always showing death? Why are you not showing anything good? And then when they stop doing that, people complain again, so you can't please everyone.
Because the media tends to lie and give you what it needs to tell you, I suppose, doesn't it?
I think because most of them probably come in illegally without getting detected, so that's why probably, yeah, because they come in undetected.
Because people don't really care. They only care to a small degree. They don't really care. They don't really care. And at the end of the day, once again, that goes back to the leaders of the countries where these people are coming from. People are trying to survive themselves. Because it's England doesn't mean everything is a bed of roses. It's far from a bed of roses. So the leaders of the countries that we all come from, in wherever capacity, and end up wanting to live here, because it's not easy here, I blame them the most.
Just trying to keep the world blind, I guess. The world doesn't want to show all the bad stuff that's happening in the poor countries.
The mainstream media narrative around the refugee crisis has been very disturbing indeed. The anti-immigrant sentiment that has been spearheaded by Murdoch and his empire has dehumanised migrants and refugees systematically. So when the deaths of refugees in the Mediterranean do make it into newspapers, it is from the perspective that they are cockroaches or swarms of migrants trying to come over and threaten Western civilization, which of course is outrageous and makes no sense whatsoever, considering it is the Western powers which are consistently and systematically a threat to other countries' civilizations, and this has been the case for centuries.
Well, I was in Greece filming with a documentary crew at the time that the images of Alan Kurdi came out, and suddenly the world's attention shifted to the refugee crisis and the international news machine descended on it. And there was a real sense at that point that people watching, but also the people covering it, really wanted to help out. And the narrative was simple. There were these people in need and people wanted to help. And that made, for easy news making and easy documentary making, it was quite a clear story. But even then, people were predicting that the moment there was a terror attack in Europe, that it was going to complicate the issue and the narrative would become slightly contorted and coloured by these events. And the political opportunists who'd been quiet until that point leapt on these fears that people inevitably had after events like these. And it suddenly changed the conversation completely. And yeah, I believe now that people don't necessarily want to read these stories about refugees dying and being washed up on beaches. And there isn't so much focus on them because it's almost like homelessness. People feel guilty about it. They don't know if they can trust the needy and they want to avert their eyes and they don't want to face these problems. They want them to be solved, but they can't face up to them.
Under the new plan, the European Union would provide Libya's government with funds to increase efforts to stop refugee boats from crossing territorial waters and to break the business model of traffickers who helped 181,000 refugees enter the European Union through Libya and Italy last year.
The announcement was heavily criticised by human rights groups who said such plans exposed refugees to further risks and abuses. Very little is being done by the West to solve the refugee crisis. The delay in taking decisive action can be measured not in days, but in deaths. a morbid toll which just keeps rising.